Archivist Talvek rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the glowing screen in front of him. The council records chamber was quiet at this hour, with only the soft hum of machines keeping him company. His 6 eyes moved back and forth across the data, looking for answers to questions that had been bothering him for weeks. The official story was simple and clear. 500 years ago, humans had destroyed themselves in something called the Great Human Catastrophe. According to the records, humans were violent creatures who loved war and fighting. They had spread across the galaxy like a disease, bringing death and destruction wherever they went. Finally, they had turned their weapons on each other and wiped themselves out completely. The Galactic Council had saved everyone. They had arrived just in time to clean up the mess and bring peace back to the galaxy. Every schoolchild knew this story. Every planet in Council space had monuments celebrating the day the Council rescued civilization from the human threat. But Talvek was starting to think the story was wrong. It had started with small things. Energy readings that didn't match the timeline. Communication logs with dates that came before humans were supposed to be extinct. At first, he thought these were just mistakes in the old computer systems. The archives were ancient, and data sometimes got mixed up over the centuries. Then he found the encrypted files. They were hidden deep in the old military databases, protected by security codes that should have been impossible to break. But Talvek was good at his job. He had spent his whole life working with old data, finding patterns that others missed. These files were different from everything else in the archives. They talked about something called Project Erasure. The more he read, the more worried he became. The files mentioned human settlements that were supposed to be empty. They talked about evacuation plans and escape routes. Most disturbing of all, they contained orders to destroy evidence and create false records. Talvek looked around the empty chamber. He was alone with these terrible secrets, and he didn't know what to do with them. If these files were real, then everything the Council had taught them was a lie. The humans hadn't destroyed themselves. Someone else had tried to destroy them. His hands shook as he copied the files to a secure storage device. This was dangerous work. The Council didn't like people who asked too many questions about the past. But he couldn't ignore what he had found. The truth was too important. The night cycle was almost over when the alert came in. At first, Talvek thought it was just another routine message from the deep space monitoring stations. These alerts came in all the time, usually just reports about asteroid movements or solar flares from distant stars. But this alert was different. The message was marked as urgent and came from Station 7, which monitored the old human territories. Talvek opened the file and felt his heart skip a beat. The readings were coming from the Sol system, the place where Earth had once been. According to the official records, Sol was a dead system, empty of all life. But the scanners were picking up something impossible: organized signals, structured transmissions. The kind of communication patterns that only came from intelligent life. Talvek stared at the data in shock. The signals were complex and purposeful, clearly artificial rather than natural. Someone or something was in the Sol system, and they were actively communicating. The transmission patterns looked familiar, similar to the old human communication protocols he had studied in the archives. His mind raced as he tried to understand what this meant. If humans were extinct, who was sending these signals? If the Sol system was empty, where were these transmissions coming from? And why were they using patterns that looked so much like human technology? The more he thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together. The encrypted files about Project Erasure, the inconsistencies in the historical records, the evidence of cover-ups and false information. And now, signals from a system that was supposed to be dead. What if the humans weren't extinct at all? What if they had escaped somehow and the Council had been lying about everything for 500 years? Talvek felt sick as he realized what this could mean. If humans were still alive, then the Council's entire foundation was built on a lie. Every monument, every school lesson, every piece of propaganda about the great human catastrophe would be false. The Council had built their authority on the story of saving the galaxy from human destruction. If that story wasn't true, then what right did they have to rule? He looked at the storage device containing the encrypted files, then at the alert about the Sol system signals. In his hands, he held evidence that could shake the entire galaxy. The question was, what should he do with it? Outside the chamber windows, the lights of the council capital city twinkled in the darkness. Millions of beings lived their lives believing in the council's version of history. They trusted their leaders and felt safe knowing that the dangerous humans were gone forever. But what if everything they believed was wrong? What if the real danger wasn't the humans, but the council itself? Talvek made his decision. He would keep investigating, no matter how dangerous it became. The truth was too important to ignore, and the galaxy deserved to know what had really happened 500 years ago. The signals from Sol were still coming in, growing stronger by the hour. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer. Captain Li Huan stood quietly on the bridge of his ship, looking at the big screen in front of him. There, growing bigger every moment, was a beautiful blue and green planet. Earth. His home. The home his people had been forced to leave 300 years ago. He had never seen Earth before. None of the crew had. They were all born in the cold, dark regions at the edge of the galaxy, where their ancestors had hidden after escaping the Council's trap. But they had all grown up hearing stories about this world. The blue oceans, the green forests, the white clouds that moved across the sky like soft cotton. Now they were finally coming home. Behind him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. These were good people, trained for this moment their whole lives. They knew the risks. They knew that the Council still controlled this part of space and that Council ships would try to stop them. But they also knew why they had to take this chance. The evacuation had been a miracle. 3 centuries ago, human spies had discovered the truth about the Council's plans. What the Council called a quarantine protocol was really something much worse. They weren't planning to isolate human worlds. They were planning to destroy them completely. The warning had come just in time. In secret, working through the night across dozens of worlds, human leaders had organized the greatest evacuation in history. Ships had been hidden in asteroid fields and behind moons. Entire families had disappeared overnight, leaving behind empty cities and abandoned settlements. The Council had arrived expecting to find billions of humans waiting to be destroyed. Instead, they found empty worlds and silent space stations. Rather than admit their failure, they had created a lie. They told the galaxy that humans had destroyed themselves in a great war. They built monuments celebrating the end of human violence, and taught children that the Council had saved everyone from the terrible human threat. But humans had not been destroyed. They had been preparing. "Captain," said Navigation Officer Kim Yuna from her station. "We're picking up Council patrol ships. Ahead, 3 destroyers moving to intercept us. Should I power up the new shield systems?" Juan thought for a moment. The new technology they had developed during their long exile was far beyond anything the Council had. Their ships could do things that seemed impossible. But using those abilities would mean starting a fight, and they had hoped to avoid that. "Not yet," he said calmly. "Let's try talking to them first. Open a communication channel." The main screen changed to show a Council officer with gray skin and 4 arms. The alien's face was angry and suspicious. "Unknown ships, you are entering restricted space," the Council officer said. "Identify yourselves immediately, or we will open fire." "This is Captain Li Huan of the Earth Defense Fleet," Huan replied. "We are humans returning to our home system. We come in peace and request safe passage." The Council officer's eyes went wide with shock. "Impossible. Humans are extinct. You must be pirates using stolen technology. Surrender now or face destruction." "We are not pirates," Huan said. "We are the descendants of the humans your people tried to destroy 3 centuries ago. We have returned to reclaim our home." The communication channel went dead. A moment later, alarms started ringing on the bridge. "They're firing on us," Yuna shouted. "Energy weapons, full power." The Council ships had opened fire without warning, sending bright beams of deadly energy toward the human fleet. They expected to destroy the small group of ships quickly and easily. After all, humans were supposed to be primitive and violent creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. They were not prepared for what happened next. The human ships didn't try to run or hide. Instead, they seemed to shimmer and fade, becoming like ghosts in space. The Council weapons passed right through them without causing any damage. Then the human ships became solid again and fired back. But their weapons were different. Instead of trying to destroy the Council ships, the human weapons shut down their engines and weapon systems, leaving them floating helplessly in space. The Council crews were alive and unhurt, but their ships could no longer fight. "What kind of technology is this?" one of the Council officers broadcast in panic. "How are they doing this?" More Council ships arrived, and the same thing happened to them. The human ships seemed to dance through space, appearing and disappearing like spirits. They disabled every Council vessel without killing a single crew member, then moved on toward Earth as if nothing had happened. Within hours, news of the strange battle was spreading across Council space. People called it the Ghost Fleet, mysterious, ships that could not be touched but could stop any enemy. Wild stories began to spread about humans returning from the dead to haunt their old enemies. But the humans weren't ghosts. They were very much alive, and they had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. They had developed new sciences, new technologies, and new ways of thinking about war and peace. They had learned that the best victory was the one where nobody had to die. As Earth grew larger on the screen, Captain Juan activated the ship's communication system and broadcast a message on all frequencies throughout the galaxy. "We have returned, and we remember everything. The Council told you we destroyed ourselves, but that was a lie. We escaped, we survived, and we have grown strong. We do not come seeking revenge. We come seeking truth. The galaxy deserves to know what really happened 300 years ago." The message would reach every world in Council space within days. The truth that had been hidden for centuries was finally coming to light. Talvek had not slept properly in weeks. His 6 eyes were red and tired, but he could not stop reading the files he had found in the Council archives. Every new document he discovered made him feel sicker than the last. The truth about what his people had done was worse than he had ever imagined. Project Erasure was not what the Council had told everyone. The official story said it was a plan to protect the galaxy from dangerous humans. But the real files told a completely different story. The Council had planned to kill every human in the galaxy, not because humans were violent, but because they were becoming too powerful and too free. The humans had not been the monsters that children learned about in school. They had been explorers and inventors who traveled between the stars, making friends with other species. They built schools and hospitals on alien worlds. They shared their technology freely with anyone who needed it. Most dangerous of all, from the Council's point of view, they taught other species about democracy and individual rights. The Council was ruled by a small group of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They liked having control over everyone else. They made all the important decisions and expected other species to obey without question. But humans were different. They believed that all intelligent beings should have a voice in government. They started forming alliances with other species based on equality rather than control. This scared the Council leaders. If other species started demanding the same rights that humans had, the Council's power would be threatened. So they decided that humans had to be eliminated completely. They created Project Erasure to make it happen. The plan was simple and terrible. Council forces would attack every human world at the same time, killing everyone they found. Then they would destroy all evidence of what had really happened. They would tell the galaxy that humans had started a great war and destroyed themselves. The Council would be seen as heroes who had cleaned up the mess and restored peace. But something had gone wrong. When the Council ships arrived at human worlds, they found them empty. Somehow, almost every human in the galaxy had vanished overnight. There were no bodies, no signs of fighting, no explanation for where they had gone. The Council leaders were furious, but they decided to continue with their plan anyway. They destroyed the empty human cities and created fake evidence of a great human war. They built monuments celebrating the end of human aggression and rewrote history books to make themselves look like saviors. For 300 years, the lie had worked perfectly. Until now. Talvek was hiding on Captain Juan's ship, working day and night to organize all the evidence he had found. His own species had been part of the council for thousands of years, but he could no longer stay silent about their crimes. The truth was too important. He worked with Dr. Park Minji, the human ship's science officer, to prepare the files for broadcast. Minji was a quiet woman with kind eyes who helped him understand the human technology needed to send the information across the galaxy. She never showed anger about what her people had suffered, but Talvek could see the sadness in her face when she read the council's plans. "Are you sure about this?" Minji asked him as they prepared the final transmission. "Once we send this out, there will be no going back. Your own people will see you as a traitor." Talvek looked at her with his tired eyes. "My people already became traitors when they helped plan genocide," he said. "I would rather be called a traitor by criminals than stay silent about their crimes." When they finally broadcast the files, the response was immediate and shocking. The archived documents spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within hours, news networks on dozens of worlds were reporting the story. Within days, the evidence was being discussed in government buildings and school classrooms across council space. The reaction was explosive. Species that had been loyal to the council for centuries began asking questions they had never dared to ask before. If the council had lied about humans, what else had they lied about? If they were willing to commit genocide, what other crimes had they covered up? On the world of Kepler Prime, the local government demanded to see all council records about their planet's history. On the mining colonies of the Vega system, workers went on strike and refused to send resources to council worlds. On the trading station at Alpha Centauri, alien merchants began refusing to accept council currency. Most shocking of all, some council member species began to openly support the humans. The Andromedans, who had always been quiet supporters of the council, issued a statement calling for a full investigation into Project Erasure. The crystalline beings of the Sirius system declared that they would no longer recognize council authority until the truth was revealed. The carefully built story that had held the galaxy together for 5 centuries was falling apart piece by piece. Every day brought new revelations as more species found the courage to examine their own suppressed histories and question the council's version of events. Talvek watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy and felt both pride and terror. Pride that the truth was finally being told, and terror about what would happen next. The council would not give up their power easily. They had killed billions to create their lie. What would they do to protect it? But it was too late to stop what they had started. The truth was spreading like fire across the galaxy, and nothing the council could do would put it out. After 300 years of lies, the real story was finally being told. The galaxy would never be the same. The truth about Project Erasure spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and with it came something nobody expected. Rebellions started on dozens of worlds as angry citizens demanded answers from their council-appointed leaders. But what shocked everyone was not the violence they thought would come. It was the kindness that arrived instead. Commander Cho Sung-hyun stood in the medical bay of his ship, watching as his team prepared supplies for another relief mission. Below them, the planet Xerion was in chaos. The local council government had declared martial law after protests broke out, demanding the truth about human history. Thousands of civilians were trapped in their cities without proper food or medical care. The council expected humans to ignore the suffering or maybe even make it worse as revenge for what had been done to them. Instead, human ships began arriving at troubled worlds with supplies and aid. "Commander," said his medical officer, Lieutenant Park Jinsu, "we have enough medicine here to treat the plague that's been killing people on Xerion for the past 50 years. The council always said it was incurable." Cho smiled sadly. "The council said many things that weren't true. Let's make sure these people get the help they need." The humans had spent 3 centuries in exile developing incredible new technologies. Not weapons of war, but tools of healing and building. They had cures for diseases that the council claimed could never be treated. They had machines that could turn dead planets into green worlds full of life. They had clean energy systems that could power entire cities without harming the environment. And they were sharing all of it freely. On the desert world of Kalos, engineer Hiram worked with teams of refugees who had fled their homes during the recent uprisings. The planet had been a mining colony for centuries, its surface stripped bare by Council extraction operations. Most people lived in underground tunnels because the surface was too poisoned to support life. "Watch this," Hiram said to a group of amazed Kalosians as she activated her terraforming equipment. Within hours, the poisoned soil began to change. Plants started growing where nothing had lived for generations. Clean water began flowing from springs that had been dry for decades. "How is this possible?" asked Elder Vextani, the leader of the refugee camp. "The Council's scientists said this world could never be healed." "The Council's scientists weren't really trying to heal it," Hiram replied gently. "They made more money keeping you dependent on them for everything you needed to survive." Word of these miracles spread quickly. On world after world, humans arrived not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as helpers offering gifts of knowledge and healing. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to work together with other species as equals. Captain Juan stood before a gathering of representatives from 50 different species on the neutral station at Proxima Base. Many of these beings had never seen a human before. They had grown up hearing stories about human violence and destruction. Now they were trying to understand what they were really seeing. "We know you expected us to come back seeking revenge," Juan said to the crowded assembly hall. "We understand why you would think that. For 3 centuries you've been told that humans are violent and dangerous, but that was never true." He gestured to the large screen behind him, which showed images of human aid missions across the galaxy. "We didn't spend 300 years preparing for war. We spent them preparing for peace. Real peace. Not the enforced silence that the Council calls order." An elderly Altarian representative stood up. "But surely you must want some form of justice for what was done to your people?" "Justice? Yes," Juan replied. "But not revenge. Justice means telling the truth. It means making sure something like this never happens again. It means building a galaxy where all species can live free from fear of genocide." The response to human generosity was overwhelming. Species that had been loyal to the Council for centuries began openly defecting to join the growing human alliance. The Council's authority, built on lies and maintained through fear, was crumbling faster than anyone had imagined possible. The Council leaders themselves were in panic. Some tried to maintain control through increasingly desperate measures. They declared martial law on rebellious worlds. They cut off trade with species that questioned their authority. They even threatened to use their military against their own member worlds. But it was too late. Their legitimacy had evaporated the moment the truth about Project Erasure became known. Talvek, now working openly as the leader of a growing faction of truth-seekers within what remained of the Council structure, continued to expose more buried secrets. Each new revelation brought fresh waves of anger and disbelief from species who discovered how they had been manipulated and lied to for centuries. The crystalline beings of Sirius had been told their homeworld was naturally unstable, requiring constant Council intervention to prevent earthquakes. The truth was that Council mining operations had deliberately destabilized the planet to create dependency. The aquatic Cetians had been convinced that their ocean was too toxic for other species to visit, keeping them isolated. In reality, the Council had been secretly dumping industrial waste in their waters for decades. The winged Averans had been told they were too primitive to govern themselves. But the archives revealed they had actually been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy before the Council systematically destroyed their infrastructure and rewritten their history. Each species that learned the truth about their own oppression became another ally in the growing movement for change. The old order was indeed dying, collapsing under the weight of its own lies and crimes. But something beautiful was being born to replace it. A new kind of galactic civilization based on truth, cooperation, and respect for all forms of intelligent life. The great assembly hall of Kepler Station had never seen anything like this before. Representatives from every known species in the galaxy had gathered for what many were calling the most important meeting in galactic history. The massive circular chamber was filled with beings of every shape and size imaginable, creatures with wings, tentacles, crystalline bodies, and forms that defied easy description. At the center of it all sat the evidence that would change everything. For 3 long days, the truth was laid bare before the assembled representatives. Talvek, no longer hiding his role as a truth seeker, presented the archived files he had discovered. His voice was steady as he read from council documents that described Project Erasure in cold clinical terms, the planned genocide of an entire species, discussed as casually as a routine mining operation. Survivors came forward to tell their stories. An elderly human named Kim Daeho, one of the few who remembered the evacuation, described the terror of that night 3 centuries ago when entire worlds had to be abandoned in hours. His voice broke as he spoke of families torn apart and the fear that they would never see their home again. But perhaps most damaging of all were the recordings from actual council meetings. The assembly listened in horrified silence as council leaders from centuries past celebrated their plans to eliminate humanity. They heard officials joke about the fake monuments they would build. They listened to debates about how to make the lie more convincing. Elder Vexitani from Kalos stood up during the testimony, her voice shaking with emotion. "We trusted you," she said, looking at the remaining council representatives. "For 500 years we believed you were protecting us. Instead, you were the greatest threat we ever faced." The few council officials who had come to the tribunal sat in stunned silence. Some tried to defend their predecessors' actions, claiming they had been necessary for galactic stability, but their words sounded hollow in the face of such overwhelming evidence. On the final day, Captain Juan rose to address the assembly. She had been chosen to speak for humanity, and the weight of that responsibility was clear in her careful words. "We stand here today not as conquerors but as partners," she began. "For 3 centuries we watched from afar as our galaxy suffered under the Council's rule. We could have returned with weapons and anger, seeking revenge for what was done to us. But that would have made us no better than those who tried to destroy us." She gestured to the evidence displays around the chamber. "Instead, we propose something different. Not revenge, but renewal. Not conquest, but cooperation. We propose a new galactic federation based on principles the Council never understood: transparency, equality, and the right of every species to determine its own path." The proposal was simple but revolutionary. Instead of a small group of powerful species ruling over everyone else, the new federation would be governed by representatives chosen by each member world. Every species would have an equal voice, regardless of their size, technology, or military power. Decisions would be made openly, with all records available to any citizen who wanted to see them. Most importantly, membership would be voluntary. Any world that preferred independence would be free to choose that path, with the Federation's full support and protection. When the vote was called, the result was overwhelming. Of the 847 species represented at the tribunal, 834 voted to dissolve the old council structure and establish the new federation. Only 13 voted against, and even most of those were former council worlds whose leaders were simply too afraid of change to embrace something new. The months that followed were busy ones. Across the galaxy, monuments celebrating the great human catastrophe were carefully removed and replaced with memorials honoring the real victims of the Council's lies. These new monuments told the true story, not just of human suffering, but of all the species that had been oppressed, manipulated, and deceived over the centuries. Former Council worlds lined up to join the new Federation, attracted by the promise of honest government and equal representation. But just as many chose independence, forming their own small governments or joining regional alliances. The humans kept their promise, supporting these choices completely and offering friendship and trade to all. The real change, though, could be seen in the small moments of daily life throughout the galaxy. On New Terra, one of the first worlds settled by returning humans, a classroom filled with the chatter of young voices represented the future everyone was building together. Human children sat next to young Altarians, their blue skin shimmering in the morning light. Crystalline Syrian youngsters worked on projects with feathered Avaran chicks. A small group of aquatic Cedian children participated through holographic projection from their water-filled learning pod. Their teacher, Zaltex, was a former council citizen who had lived through the transition from the old system to the new. Her species had tentacles instead of arms and spoke in musical tones that the universal translators converted to standard galactic speech. Today we're going to learn about the real history of our galaxy, she announced to the class. Not the made-up stories that some people used to tell, but the true story of how different species met each other, learned from each other, and became friends. Through the classroom windows, the sky was filled with ships from dozens of different worlds, traders carrying goods and ideas between the stars, explorers heading out to discover new worlds, families visiting relatives on distant planets. The galaxy had become what it was always meant to be, a community of equals working together toward a better future. As Zaltex watched her students collaborate on their projects, she smiled. Truth, it turned out, really was the best foundation for building something beautiful.